Hello, my name is Tim Pyne from Footprint. We're here today to have a conversation about insuring timber buildings. We've got here, I'm going to get your book in very quickly, Nic Crawley, who's written actually a fascinating book about CLT. He's an architect at AHMM. We've also got Dominic and Phil Callow, who represent the insurance world. Now, I don't know about you, but I just find it really interesting that most people say to me it's very, very difficult to get a timber building insured. We had Andrew Warr in here a few weeks ago and he said the big problem is getting these timber buildings insured. Why is that?
Do you want to go first, Phil, or shall I?
They've all looked at me.
It's a big deal. It's an issue our team's mentioned.
They burn and they get damaged by water. And we don't have enough data to show otherwise.
But surely the BRE and people have actually been testing these things and they've charred them and all the rest of it. And
the technology, as far as we're aware, with the CLT and mass timber, the main burns are happening sort of as we speak, is my understanding. So as an insurance industry, we're really waiting on the performance testing data that we're understood is coming this summer.
So it's early adopters that are the problem. Is that what you're finding? When you go out, when you talk to a client about, let's think about doing it out of timber, what's their first response?
Most people, there's been this massive shift the last year. There's been a step change in people's approach to different materials or moving things on, perhaps. People are cautious. Getting past building control, fire authorities and insurers are probably the main barriers that we're finding from the larger scale stuff we're looking at. But people are keen to push it, but they've got limited resources. So if people are wanting large scale burn tests, or all the work leading up to that, ensuring everything else is watertight, dotting the I's, crossing the T's to get to that point, and then doing burn tests. There's not many projects or clients that can support that expenditure at this stage.
The real issue is that we understand that timber burns. We also understand that there are plenty of other materials that burn and that are damaged by water. We do tend to focus a lot on fire when actually water damage is it is the biggest concern for the insurance industry.
How come the roofs don't leak anymore, do they?
It's not necessarily roof leaking. It's certainly during construction. You've got in some instances a very complex site with a lot of water either on site or not supposed to be on site. So it's not necessarily the water tightness of the building, it's more the plumbing within the building. So the sort of the classic example would be everyone downs tools at 5 p.m. on a Friday and there's just a small leak that just starts, and by the time you get back to the site on a Monday, that leak has turned into a full-blown waterfall. It's a simplistic example, but water damage during construction is by far and away the biggest concern. But if we go back to fire, because I think this is where the market has quite a right to have this preconception, is that when they burn, they tend to burn to the ground. It tends to be a total loss. Now, with every other modern method or any other method of construction, there tends to be some form of containment and extinguishment that happens before that event. There are obviously extreme examples, but the perception and therefore the understanding is that a timber building under construction, if there is a fire, will burn to the ground.
But you've got these, you'll know more about this than I do, obviously, but you've got these floors that are made up of timber on the top and concrete underneath, haven't you?
It depends. There's all sorts of hybrid forms. I think today, if we're talking around mass timber rather than stick systems, very different issues in terms of how they behave in fire, how their fires are started, and also how they spread. I think you're quite right. The tests that are happening at the moment, looking at how fires will travel through compartments, larger scale office buildings, have not been done to date. And I think it's because, a relatively small part of the market, the European manufacturers haven't really addressed UK specific issues. And we've been able to get on building stuff in a way that, people using steel for the first time were using steel when in the US, elsewhere in Europe, it was being used in a way that the Americans maybe wouldn't do at that point. So people are still learning. It's still this iterative process that we're learning with each project. But it's the data. We find that ourselves, understanding metrics about people on site, vehicle journeys, carbon footprints, all sorts of issues. And a key one of that, of course, is understanding where the risks are.
If I may, the problem isn't exclusive to insuring timber buildings right now. I would say the problem is much wider than that. We're in a market that's hardening significantly. and insuring steel and concrete buildings right now is a challenge. Insuring high-rise residential buildings right now is an extreme challenge.
Why is it
AHMM.
hardening? What do you mean?
It's essentially getting more expensive because insurers have suffered years of losses, and Phil has summarised it pretty well. That is not exclusively, but largely down to escape of water issues.
You'd have to, there is like any industry, the insurance industry has significant market cycles. They're quite you can imagine how a very large North American windstorm event would create a change in the market for that type of cover. We had the construction, the global construction insurance industry has been losing money now pretty much since 2016, 2017. And you couple that with the fact that markets then pull out. So there's less available capacity, and by capacity we mean the amount of money you need to pull together to equal the sum insured. So $1 billion risk needs $1 billion of capacity to gain insurance. So we've had a contraction of the capacity, and the capacity that's left is looking there saying, we're not making any money, we're not making a profit. And I think everyone will understand a desire for an insurance company to make a profit. So they have to, what we call, remediate their book, so de-risk their book. So they've got a long tail of construction projects, which they can't change. But going forward, they then look to de-risk. And part of that would be doing less volatile business, more business that they're much more certain of an outcome on. So if we then put that back into a mass timber context, well, now we'd like you to start underwriting mass timber, please. Well, hang on, I'm trying to make a profit. I haven't been making a profit. The pressure is on me. Why am I going to take something that has an increased risk? And then we've got to start having a conversation as to why that risk is not increased. And that's incredibly difficult to have when you don't have the data, as Nic mentioned.
I think Phil makes a really important point. The insurers are currently not making money underwriting steel and concrete. So their immediate response is, well, why would I start underwriting and insuring something that I don't understand if I can't make money insuring things that I thought I understood in terms of steel and concrete? Why would I go and underwrite something that I perceive to be higher risk, like timber?
But everyone understands that wood burns, so that all of us know that.
Yeah, the fire of London did happen.
It did, unfortunately.
And yeah, it did. And if we're talking about that, the last there was a major CLT loss. It was a total loss, as insofar as it burnt to the ground, in Nottingham University back in 2015, and that was a large CLT structure for their sciences at the university. I may be wrong on that, but it was certainly Nottingham, and it was certainly, I think, 2015.
It's worth saying they also built that building back, I think, in the same form. So
course,
there's ways around this, and we find that from a designer's point of view, we're having to do the extra work and gather our own data ourselves, and it is a significant challenge.
So when you're saying that the problem is that you don't have the data comes from, generally speaking, using a big company using that system a lot, and therefore investing enough into that system to actually provide the data. Is that true?
We just need more, but in theory, you need more people to build out a CLT.
You need big people to build out.
It's a chicken and an egg, unfortunately.
Yeah, and this is the problem, is it?
Is it felt? Do we feel like we're in a transitional period where
absolutely
the early adopters are pushing it, but actually we know that the Walmarts, Adidas,
the insurance,
whoever are building these headquarters out, and at some point,
absolutely,
things are going to happen.
And we will all learn from that, But the insurance industry knows this is coming. We're all humans, we're all citizens, and we're all worried about climate change and wanting to do our part. Corporately, these insurers are starting to be very vocal about doing their part through their investment arms, which is incredible. That's arguably a more important part of their business. So we know this is coming. The construction insurance world wants to facilitate for most part. There are still some insurers and so on who perhaps are not being as communicative or as collaborative as we would hope, but they're businesses, that they have their own reasons to be that way. What we have tried to do, and we've recently launched our mass timber construction facility, which is a first in the UK. What we try to do is say, look, we're not here for the large signature projects. You know, the TfL Southwark. That's not what we're here to do. What we want to build is an equitable insurance product for a developer that's looking at a 10, a 15, a 20, a 30 million pound.
Which is really interesting because that's where so much of the market is.
And
It's
that-
the medium
exactly,
scale.
exactly.
We're not talking about skyscrapers. We're talking about all the stuff that
That's where
surround us in the
CLT can reach
city.
the masses in a sense,
And it
can't
becomes much more price efficient. There's all sorts of reasons why it's very effective. So that's great.
And this is also solving what we hope was giving an option, a route to insurance for a developer, for an owner that's not a TfL or not a Google. And there are many more who are not than are. And you know, we've achieved that by going to a number of supporting insurers and really explaining to them what we've learned, what I've learned over the last 18 months of researching into this, which is that it's not a bad product. There is lots of proof out there that it self-extinguishes, so on and so on. We've all seen the barbecue made of CLT. But the problem is it's how this all combines in an actual end product during construction and during operation, which is another issue which we should talk about, to come together to mean that it's an engineered product that does not burn to the ground. And that if you build it correctly, and by that, it's really the golden thread of design. And you know, one of the solutions that we push is an early engagement, pre-planning, talking to us, talking to your broker, talking to your insurers before you get planning. Because there's some really key things that you can do as an owner or a developer from the very outset that mean you're going to have a successful project.
What are they?
So we've had project teams asking, someone's asked me today, what can we do to give the people down the chain the reassurance, the confidence that what we're proposing isn't ridiculous.
Doesn't it sound like a common theme through every form of everything you do? Early engagement it starts with.
It says that you know, as a developer, you have a story to tell. You want to build out a CLT, you've got a story already because what's the vision that you're seeing? Why do you want to use this method of construction? You've got to share that, but in that process, you'll have an equitable sort of a partner with insurers who say, look, what we're really looking for is that everyone who is involved from the very beginning is looking for a successful project delivery. So the architects, and Nick, I know you can talk more about this for us, but looking at fire safety throughout the design. We've spoken already, but we still need more information on the performance of these structures during a fire event and to a certain extent water event. And how that all comes together through design to mean that what you're intending to build, both during construction and in operational, performs equal to or better than a steel and concrete structure. And if it doesn't, what does that mean? So one of the things that I asked very early on in one of the groups that we're a part of, which is a sort of a cross-party team of people across both the build and the insurance side, and as well as London Fire and others, I asked the question of how do you repair the building? And I hate to say, everyone looked a bit, oh right, why do you want to know? Well, I don't think it's unfair for insurers to want to know how they're going to put you back into the position you were immediately prior to your loss.
Yeah, it's funny because
That's what you pay for.
I've spent my life sailing, and the first thing you look at is what you're going to do, how are you going to get all the bits.
Yeah.
You know, when they're hidden, it's very, very difficult to get at. It's interesting because we've been talking this morning about zero carbon steel. And the guy said, yeah, well, we're kind of just at the beginning of starting to work this out. Maybe 20 or 30 years' time, we might have actually got to the point where it's actually starting to happen. Concrete's a little bit better, but it's not an awful lot better. You actually have got the facility to do it pretty quickly if people get on with it and actually start going into the whole subject. Because it happens more in Europe than here at the moment, doesn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, lots of Europe has got this unbroken tradition of building with timber, as they do in the US, where things are.
Why is there a
really taking
difference,
off.
do you think? I mean, it's funny, I haven't mentioned the word Grenfell once, and we've been sitting here for the last 20 minutes. I thought that was the first thing that anybody was going to talk about, and no one's even mentioned it.
Grenfell is having an issue, is creating an issue, unfortunately, in the world of insurance, but it's a spin-off of the fact that regulations are changing, and therefore the timber sector, as it stands today, can't build buildings in mass timber over 18 metres if they're residential, and it might be 11 soon. So it's regulation that's stopping
So it's not
advancement.
just the facade, it's actually You can't do it out
No,
in the external wall builder.
It's the external wall.
But the
So you can still do the
implications,
floors.
the unintended consequences of that are reasonably broad-ranging. But the last few years has caused an awful lot of people right across the industry to reflect on how we're doing things and realign their approach, coupled with testing, coupled with an approach to the whole building approach. And this is an interesting one. I think over the next few years we're going to see this change in how buildings are managed with a building safety regulator. The construction, the design is one part, the construction is one part, operation is such a huge part of this. And there's all sorts of different aspects, the layers of safety as they've been called, that will help enable people to be more innovative, to produce lower impact buildings over time. And a lot of the testing going on at the moment is in support of that. And I think it's, this transition period will be in a place relatively soon where we've got much more data to be able to make better decisions, whether it's designers, insurers, operators.
It's forced a hard reset of the industry in many ways, hasn't it? Which is only going to lead to better buildings in the future.
So Grenfell has had a negative impact on the insurance industry. We've been shown that there is an example of a serious loss because of incorrectly erected cladding. The fire breaks were lacking, in my understanding, behind the cladding that was placed on the building, and that led to the spread of the fire. So from an insurance perspective, if you're a property underwriter and you were underwriting a number of these buildings across the UK, you now knowingly have a question: was the cladding erected correctly? To discover whether that's it's a bit more than erection, but you've suddenly got a doubt in your mind, and as a good underwriter, you need to price for an eventuality that you can absolutely see happening again, because it hasn't been replaced, it hasn't been removed, it hasn't been repaired, if indeed it requires it. So you have to assume it needs that. You have to assume that the exposure is greater. So if we put that back into mass timber, you've got a property market that is really a difficult place to be for anyone who has any form of flammable material in their building from a property perspective. Because any property underwriter is going to be, he'd lose his job if he didn't price for fire now. And I can see how you could pick arguments with that. But fundamentally, that they've been shown that there's an exposure. We've been shown that there can be a horrendous loss, and if we just on the property side of things, and so underwriters have to look at that, and they have to take that into consideration because it's been shown it has happened.
If you can imagine, insurers have overnight been shown something to be an enormous issue that they had no idea about, and so insurers' first response to that has been, well, if we didn't know about AHMM cladding, what else don't we know about? What else have we been missing through? And where haven't we been asking the right questions that we now need to ask those questions? So another massive impact Grenfell's had on the insurance sector is information requirements. The amount of information required to get a building insured or a construction project insured now is tenfold than what it was 2 or 3 years ago.
And because we can no longer make the assumptions that we could have very confidently made about that particular building.
So from an insurer's point of view, is there a framework, are there documents, is there guidance available for designers? If I have a team come to me and say, we need to be able to provide the confidence what we're doing is sensible, is there a set of requirements that people can respond to? I know every product will have different angle and different strength, but the question is we get asked is, what do I need to be able to persuade people?
You mean guidelines?
It is, because so many designers in the construction industry in the UK is built around minimal compliance. Building regs isn't good practice. It's the minimum required by law. It's an absolute backstop, and usually it's around life safety, and that's the issue. A lot of people are in life safety mindset, and they go into a project thinking, well, people don't die in office fires. Sprinklers limit the serious casualties, and then the fire brigade will turn around and say, well, what about the well-being of the people investigating a fire after an incident? And this is, the breadth of this and the depth that people are having to go back and look into is, I think, a little bit further than they've been used to.
I'll come back to your question in a second, if I may. But I think you've sort of re-raised a really important point that Phil touched on, which is repairability. Insurers, as ironic as it sounds, perhaps assume, wrongly so sometimes, that life safety is covered off through regulation. So if a building complies with regulations, it's complying with everything it needs to from a life safety standpoint, and therefore 99.9 times out of 100, people should be safe in that building or safe to get out of that building. They're more concerned from a balance sheet point of view ultimately on what is the cost of a loss on this building in terms of me having to reinstate it. And with timber, we all know it burns. There's no denying that, but we also know that how many office owners out there, if they have a CLT, a beautiful CLT building, and it gets charred to 1, 2, 3 layers in through a fire, even if it's structurally sound, are going to say, oh yeah, I'll take a black building as opposed to a nice wooden one. I
challenge that, because one of the points I tried to make in the book is that whether it's seen, whether it's used for an environmental point of view, carbon impact story, I think it's a great material to be using, whether it's seen or not, and you can cover it.
Nick, the insurance industry is not trying to tell you otherwise. We're just going to say, we're just trying to tell you that you cannot tell us right now what the owner of that building will say at that time, and as a result of that, I can't model that. Therefore, I can't price that, and if I can't do that, the only thing I can do is assume the worst.
Yep. So understood. We can say we can cover it with plasterboard, make it look like this, but actually, that's while I wanted it for the well-being reasons or the biophilic aspect to it.
And the plasterboard point is a really interesting one, because I've had this recently and with a designer saying, well, look, if I completely encapsulate it in fire retardant plasterboard, I'm doing exactly what I've done on every other steel and concrete building I've designed in reality. It's just that this frame inside is timber. And insurers say, well, great, but what happens if that plasterboard does fail then? What happens if we go through its 60 or 90 minute lifespan and we get to the wood? When we get to the wood in a timber building, it starts burning. Whereas if we get to the steel or concrete in a steel or concrete building, typically, and don't quote me on this, the temperatures aren't hot enough for that to become a part of the fire load of the building.
We should point out we do know that steel and concrete can burn if it is hot enough.
And can fail quite dramatically.
And can structurally weaken even if it doesn't burn, agreed. But the argument from insurers is if you get through the plasterboard on a timber building, you've then got extra fuel load. Whereas if you get through plasterboard in a steel or concrete building, in theory, depending on the heat, probably you won't have an extra fuel load.
So this again comes back to using a material appropriately and understanding it and designing accordingly. So steel, for example, is used in most of the ships in the world and has been for the last 80 years, but it sinks like a stone. Yeah. It's not great, it's not great for floating, but if you use it well and appropriately, and I think we said earlier that, the issue around CLT, certainly in this country, with less than 1,000 CLT buildings built, out of a built stock of 23, 25 million, there's so little information about it.
It would be great if the owners of these buildings got together and shared their data on these buildings. I mean, we don't have that. There's no central resource that we can just look up and understand the performance. And this is a situation where everyone's got to help each other and be respectful of the situation that each of us are in. Yeah. I've mentioned equitable, and that's all we can try and do from an insurance perspective to help developers to provide an equitable policy. It's got to be fair, and all parties need to come to the table on that. So performance of these buildings, if there are thousands of them out there, how are they doing? Yeah. What issues have there been? There's benefit to everyone from knowing that. Starting with the designers, but ultimately then coming back from an insurance perspective. That may be a bridge too far, but it's the intent there. Everyone wants to be together on this and help each other, but that type of information would be very useful.
So that's, I think, sharing the knowledge, the experience. That was the driver behind War Thistleton's 100 CLT book. That's exactly why I chose to do this. We can bring together all sorts of projects and share the lessons learned, and there's nerdy details of people with moisture meters in here.
It's quite interesting actually, because you all get on in terms of you all agree.
Okay.
But at the same time, we haven't got a solution, have we?
Well, no, there is a solution.
Yeah. Well, there is a solution, but it's not from us. It's actually the developers. Is it the developers or the construction people have got to actually
No, I think everyone's doing a bit.
As of today, what we're hearing in the market that in the last month or so, 3 very large projects within centre of London have got insurance.
How large?
A couple of 100 million.
Really?
Household name clients. obviously I can't, this is market rumours, but I have it with authority that they've been placed, which is great news.
It's good. And you think there's a proper sea change in this whole world, do you?
Absolutely. My involvement in timber has gone up 5+ times in the last 18 months as a result of clients saying, we now recognise that our ESG footprint and credentials are absolutely a cornerstone of what we're doing.
The thing about it is, as I remember, timber is great because you've got really good tolerances.
There's all sorts of reasons, yep, whether it's, carbon issues aside, the precision of the manufactured panels, the stability of them, the health and safety aspects, far fewer people on site for far less time. You know what you're getting, so quality issues. We work in an industry that is effectively abusive to its labour force. We can't find staff, we have trouble working on site. There's lots about it that I think that have other benefits, and I'd be really interested to know whether they're taken into account as people are assessing risks.
And if all of that is articulated properly to insurers, I totally agree with you. It should have a huge positive impact on the insurability of a project. Because so much more is happening off-site in a controlled environment with good lighting, no rain, no one having a fag standing next to the bit of wood.
It was quite interesting that conversation went on for at least half an hour before anybody mentioned the dreaded word Grenfell. It's not just about that, is it? It's about water and all sorts of other things, and about communication and stuff like that. It's actually been a really fascinating conversation. Thank you very much for coming in.
Pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you.